They thought they knew me. My daughters-in-law, Claire and Madison, had me all figured out. The sweet but struggling mother-in-law who clips coupons and drives a 12-year-old sedan with a rattling muffler. The woman who needed their help with groceries and their gentle suggestions about affordable senior living. What they didn't know was that I was sitting on $50 million. But this isn't just about money. This is about respect, about being seen, and about the moment I decided to stop playing small in my own life. If you're ready for a story that will change how you see family dynamics forever, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. My name is Mary Anderson. I'm 62 years old, and I've been living a lie for 3 years. Not because I'm ashamed of who I am, but because I learned something painful about human nature. People treat you differently when they think you have money, and sometimes they treat you worse when they think you don't. It was a Tuesday morning in October when everything changed. The kind of morning where the air smells like dying leaves and wood smoke, where your breath comes out in little puffs and the frost hasn't quite melted off the windshields yet. I was in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd raised my 2 sons, Daniel and Mark, making coffee in my old percolator when my phone rang. Claire's name appeared on the screen. My older daughter-in-law, married to Daniel for 8 years now. Claire is the kind of woman who runs charity galas like military operations, who never has a hair out of place, whose voice carries that particular tone of authority wrapped in silk. "Mary," she said without preamble, "I've spoken to Daniel about the situation, and we think it's time to have a family meeting about your long-term care plans." The situation. I set my coffee mug down carefully, feeling the chip on the handle where I'd dropped it years ago. "What situation would that be, Claire?" "Well," her voice carried that patient tone people use with children. "With your hip giving you trouble and your car acting up again, it's best to be proactive about these things. You're not getting any younger." My hip, which was fine. I walked 3 miles every morning through the neighborhood where I had lived for 30 years, past the Johnson's fence that needed painting and the Miller's garden that bloomed like something out of a fairy tale each spring. My car, a reliable Honda Civic that I kept because it was practical, not because it was all I could afford. But Claire didn't know that. None of them knew that. As I listened to her outline her concerns, my declining health, my financial limitations, my isolation, I found myself staring out the window at the maple tree in my backyard. The same tree I'd climbed as a girl, where I'd dreamed of building something bigger than this small town could contain. Funny how life comes full circle. You see, what Claire didn't know, what none of my extended family knew, is that 3 years ago, I sold Anderson Security Solutions for $52 million. What started in my basement as a desperate attempt to pay my late husband's medical bills had become one of the most innovative cybersecurity firms in the region. We held patents on data protection protocols that were now industry standard. I had investments that generated in more than a month than most people saw in a year. I owned a penthouse in the city that overlooked the river, artwork that hung in museums, and more recently, a 30-acre estate just outside town, complete with its own helicopter landing pad. But to my daughters-in-law, I was just Mom, who lived in the old house with the blue shutters and carried the same worn leather purse year after year. Madison and I have been discussing it, and we think the timing is perfect. We'll all be in town this weekend for Mark's birthday anyway. Madison, my younger daughter-in-law, married to my youngest son, Mark, for 5 years. Where Claire was sharp edges and crystal-clear authority, Madison was soft suggestions and backhanded compliments wrapped in genuine-sounding concern. She had a gift for making you feel grateful for insults. "We just want what's best for you, Mary," Claire was saying. "We found some wonderful facilities that offer exactly the kind of care and community you deserve." Deserve. Such an interesting word choice.
"I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm quite comfortable where I am." A pause. The kind of pause that speaks volumes. "Of course you are, Mary, but comfort isn't the same as being realistic about the future. We have a responsibility to make sure you're, well, cared for." Responsibility. Another loaded word. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. The same house where I'd kissed scraped knees and helped with homework. Where I'd held my husband Thomas through 8 months of illness before cancer finally took him. Where I'd cried over spreadsheets at 2 in the morning, trying to figure out how to turn an idea into a business that could pay for his treatments. This house held everything I'd ever been, but I didn't show them everything I'd become. Thomas had been gone for 8 years now, and I missed him most in the quiet moments like this. He would have known exactly what I was thinking. He would have laughed, that deep, rumbling laugh that used to shake his whole chest, and said, "Mary Elizabeth, you're planning something wicked, aren't you?" And he would have been right. The truth was, I'd been waiting for this moment. Not hoping for it, but knowing it would come. I'd seen the looks that passed between Claire and Madison at family gatherings, the way their eyes would sweep over my simple clothes, my practical shoes, my sensible car, the way they'd lower their voices when they thought I couldn't hear them discussing my situation. I'd watched them exchange glances when I brought store-bought dessert to potlucks instead of something from the expensive bakery downtown. I'd listened to their gentle suggestions about updating my wardrobe and their offers to help with grocery shopping. All kindness on the surface, all pity underneath. But here's what they didn't understand. I'd chosen simplicity, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. When you've built something from nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, starting with more debt than hope, you learn to distinguish between what you need and what you want. You learn that the most expensive things aren't always the most valuable, and you learn that showing off your wealth is often just another kind of prison. That afternoon, I made a call to Margot, my assistant for the past 12 years. She'd been with me through every phase of this journey. She knew exactly what this meant. "Margot, I need you to arrange something for this weekend." "Of course, Mrs. Anderson. What can I do for you?" I looked out my window again, at that maple tree, now golden in the October light. "I need the helicopter prepped and ready for this weekend. We're going to need it Saturday morning, around 10. "The helicopter?" I could hear the smile in her voice. Margot had been with me through every phase of this journey. She knew exactly what this meant. "Where will you be needing transport to?" "Home," I said simply. "We're going home." By home, I meant the estate, the place I'd bought 6 months ago when I decided to open a regional office here and needed somewhere that reflected not who I used to be, but who I'd become. 30 acres of rolling hills, gardens, and possibility. A renovated historic mansion with 10 bedrooms, each one decorated with care and attention to detail. Guest houses that looked like something from a luxury travel magazine. A private lake that reflected the sky like a mirror. It was everything I dreamed of in that maple tree as a girl, and everything I'd earned through sleepless nights and impossible risks as a woman. The weekend arrived with that particular bite in the air that promises winter. Saturday morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that makes you want to stay in bed with coffee and a good book. But I had other plans. I dressed carefully that morning, not in my usual weekend clothes, the comfortable jeans and soft sweaters I genuinely preferred, but in the costume they expected. Worn denim with a small stain on the knee, a sweater with a hole near the cuff that I'd been meaning to mend, sneakers that had seen better decades. My hair was in a loose ponytail, no makeup, carrying my old canvas tote bag instead of the leather purse I usually preferred. I looked exactly like what they thought I was, a woman who'd given up caring about appearances because she couldn't afford to care anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family meeting was scheduled at 9 a.m. at the old house. My house, though they'd somehow made me feel like I was the guest and they were the hosts. I arrived to find Claire's pristine white SUV already in the driveway, beside Mark and Madison's silver sedan. Both vehicles were spotless, detailed to perfection, their chrome gleaming even under the overcast sky. Claire opened the door before I could knock, looking like she'd stepped from the pages of a lifestyle magazine. Cream silk blouse, tailored charcoal trousers, and heels that cost more than my first car. Her hair was swept into that effortlessly perfect style that takes 45 minutes to achieve. And her smile was warm, but somehow pitying.
"Mary," she said, her voice carrying that tone of gentle authority I'd grown to despise. "We were expecting you earlier. Did your bus get delayed?" Bus. She assumed I'd taken public transportation. Of course she did. "I took a taxi from the airport," I replied evenly, stepping into the house that still smelled like the vanilla candles I'd burned for 30 years. "Airport?" Claire's perfectly shaped eyebrows lifted in confusion. "I thought you were staying here for the weekend." "I had business to take care of first," I said, which was true enough. Madison appeared in the hallway, holding a gift bag tied with a cheerful ribbon. She was dressed more casually than Claire. Designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people spent on their entire wardrobe, but everything about her screamed expensive restraint. "Mary!" she exclaimed, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. "We brought you something." She pressed the gift bag into my hands, and I could feel the weight of whatever was inside. A gift card, I realized as I peeked, to a mid-range department store. "I thought you could update your wardrobe a bit," Madison explained, her smile gentle but pointed. "Something more professional, in case you want to pick up some part-time work." Part-time work. At 62. Because they assumed I needed the money. I thanked her and tucked the bag away, biting back the dozen responses that came to mind. Dinner that night was a masterclass in subtle condescension. We sat around my own dining room table, the one that Thomas and I had bought secondhand when we were young and refinished together over long weekends, while they discussed their lives with the casual assumption that I couldn't relate to any of it. Mary talked about her upcoming charity gala, the kind of event where tables cost $5,000 and the wine list reads like a college course in European geography. She mentioned the silent auction items, weekend trips to Napa, jewelry from boutique designers, artwork from galleries I actually owned pieces from, but had never mentioned. Madison discussed her new client contract, some kind of marketing campaign for a luxury resort chain. She threw around numbers that would have impressed me if I hadn't been dealing with significantly larger ones for years. Mark beamed at her like she'd just announced she'd cured cancer. Daniel talked about his corporate bonus, his promotion, his company's expansion into international markets. All impressive achievements, and I was proud of him, but the way he presented it, with glances in my direction, as if he wanted to make sure I understood how well he was doing, stung more than I cared to admit. When the conversation finally turned to me, it was all concern and barely concealed pity. "Mary, have you given more thought to those assisted living communities we discussed?
The one near us has a wonderful activities program, pottery classes, book clubs, movie nights. And it's so safe, Madison added, her voice bright with the kind of enthusiasm people use when trying to convince children to eat vegetables. This big house, my home of 30 years, the place where I raised their husbands, where I nursed my own husband through his final illness, where I built a business that changed an entire industry, reduced to a burden, a worry, a problem to be solved. I smiled politely and said little, letting them fill the silence with their plans for my future. Tomorrow's meeting would be educational. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by people who should know you better? Because what happened next will make you believe in the power of patience and perfect timing. The next morning arrived with cruel beauty. Clear skies, golden sunlight streaming through the windows, the kind of October day that makes you grateful to be alive. The perfect backdrop for what is about to unfold. I dressed in my costume again, the worn clothes, the tired shoes, the image of gentle decline they expected to see. But this time, I slipped my phone into my pocket, the phone that held a number for Margot, for my pilot, for the life I'd built in secret. The family meeting began promptly at 9 a.m. in my living room. The same room where I'd watched my sons take their first steps, where we'd opened Christmas presents and celebrated birthdays and argued over homework. Now it felt like a courtroom, and I was clearly the defendant.
Claire had transformed the space into a conference room. Her laptop sat open on my coffee table, a small projector aimed at the blank wall where a family photo used to hang. She'd prepared a presentation. Of course she had. Madison and my sons sat side by side on the sofa, their faces serious and sympathetic. I was given the wobbly ottoman in the corner, the least comfortable seat in the room, the one that squeaked when you shifted weight. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I've compiled a comprehensive analysis of the top senior living communities in the state, Claire began, clicking to her first slide. The wall filled with images of pristine lawns, gourmet dining rooms, and cheerful seniors playing bridge. She'd done her research, I had to give her that. Each facility was presented with bullet points about amenities, medical care, and social programs. The photos were professionally shot, all soft lighting and happy faces. These facilities offer premium medical care, wellness programs, and social activities designed to enhance quality of life, she continued, her voice taking on the polished tone of a sales presentation. Of course, premium care comes with premium costs. Premium costs. Here it comes. Madison leaned forward, her expression earnest and concerned. We've been discussing how to divide the expenses fairly among all of us. Daniel and I can cover 40%, and Mark and I can handle 45%. That leaves about 15%, which would be your contribution. 15%? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. That works out to about $1,200 a month, Claire explained, her tone the same she might use with a child asking about fractions. But if that's too much for your budget, and we understand it might be, we can adjust it down to maybe $500. We don't want to create financial hardship. Financial hardship. Daniel nodded in agreement, his face serious. And you could contribute in other ways too, Mom. Visits, maybe staying overnight sometimes if there's a health emergency. Your presence would be valuable even if your financial contribution is limited. Limited. The word hung in the air like smoke. I looked around the room at these 4 people who thought they knew me, who had decided without asking that I was a burden to be managed rather than a person to be respected, who had calculated my worth down to the dollar and found me wanting. Madison gave me what I'm sure she thought was a comforting smile. And Mary, if you ever want more financial stability, Mark's agency has an entry-level administrative position coming up. It could be perfect for you. Part-time, flexible hours, nothing too demanding. Entry-level, administrative, nothing too demanding. For a woman who had built a company from nothing, who held patents that were reshaping an entire industry, who negotiated deals worth more than they'd see in their lifetimes. It was almost laughable. Almost. I stood up slowly, feeling the ottoman squeak one last time beneath me. All eyes turned to me, waiting for my grateful acceptance of their generous offer, waiting for me to acknowledge my place in their carefully constructed hierarchy. Instead, I pulled up my phone. "I need to make a quick call before we finalize anything," I said. Claire frowned, her perfectly controlled expression showing the first crack of annoyance. "Now, we're in the middle of something important." Important? To them, maybe. I ignored her and dialed. Margot answered on the first ring. "Margot? Yes, it's Mary. Are we set for arrival?" I paused, listening to her confirmation. "Perfect. 15 minutes. Yes, the lawn is big enough." When I hung up, the room was silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock Thomas had inherited from his father. Daniel was the first to speak. "Mom, did you arrange another taxi?" "Not exactly," I said, settling back onto the ottoman with a small smile. "Now, about those facilities you've researched, I have another suggestion. It's called Silvercrest Haven." Claire's fingers hovered over her laptop keyboard. "I don't recognize that name. If it's worth considering, it would have been in my research." "It wouldn't have been," I said calmly, "because it's not open to the public. They take clients only through private referral." Madison frowned. "Private referral from whom?" "From me," I said simply. "I know about Silvercrest Haven because I built it. The Silvercrest Foundation is my project." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the wind moving through the maple tree outside. Claire blinked slowly, as if I'd just spoken in a foreign language. "You funded a care facility?" "I founded it, designed it, and funded it," I corrected. "It's a fully operational memory care and rehabilitation center focused on dignity, quality of life, and family involvement. We've been open for 8 months now." They stared at me like I'd just announced I was secretly royalty. "How could you possibly afford to—" Madison began, then stopped herself. Before anyone could finish that thought, the sound began. Distant at first, then growing steadily louder, the rhythmic whoop-whoop-whoop of helicopter blades cutting through the morning air. Claire's head snapped toward the window, her perfectly styled hair actually moving for the first time since I'd known her. "What on earth?" She froze as the sound grew thunderous, rattling the windows and making the china cabinet shake. Over my lawn, my modest suburban lawn where I'd pushed toy mowers and had birthday parties, descended a sleek white helicopter, its polished body gleaming in the October sunlight. The downwash from the rotors rippled through the grass like invisible waves, bending the flowers I'd planted in my grandmother's memory and shaking leaves from that old maple tree I'd climbed as a girl dreaming of bigger things. Madison's voice was barely a whisper. "Should we call someone?" "No need," I said, standing and picking up my worn canvas tote bag. "That's my ride." "Let me ask you something. When was the last time you stopped underestimating someone because of how they looked or where they lived? Because the real shock was just beginning." 5 faces turned toward me in perfect synchronization, like a scene from a movie where everyone realized the secret agent was the quiet character all along. Claire found her voice first. "You said you don't even own a car." "I don't," I replied evenly, slinging my bag over my shoulder. "Not when I can fly." Through the window, I could see Marcus, my pilot, waving from the cockpit. He was wearing his crisp uniform, the one that had impressed foreign ministers and Fortune 500 CEOs. Today, it was going to impress my family. I walked to the door, pausing to look back at 4 people who were seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in years. I think we should continue this discussion somewhere more comfortable. The helicopter can take all of us if you're interested in seeing how the other half lives. Daniel was still staring out the window. Mom, whose helicopter is that? Mine, I said simply. One of 3, actually, but this one's my favorite for short trips. The walk from my front door to the helicopter felt like walking through a dream. Behind me, I could hear whispered conversations, urgent questions, the sound of people trying to process information that didn't fit their carefully constructed worldview. Marcus had stepped out of the cockpit and was waiting beside the open passenger door, his professional smile warm but discreet. He'd been my pilot for 2 years now, ever since I'd decided that time was too precious to waste in traffic. "Good morning, Mrs. Anderson," he said, his voice carrying just loud enough for my family to hear. "Perfect flying weather today." "Thank you, Marcus," I replied. "We'll have 4 additional passengers for this trip." His eyebrows didn't even flicker. Marcus had seen enough in his 20 years of flying to know that family dynamics could be more turbulent than any weather pattern.
As we crested the wooded ridge that separated my old life from my new one, the estate came into view. Even from the air, it was breathtaking. The renovated historic mansion sat like a jewel in a setting of rolling green hills, its stone walls warm, honey-colored in the morning light. The formal garden spread out in carefully planned sections, the rose garden Thomas would have loved, the herb garden where I actually grew some of my own food, the cutting garden that supplied fresh flowers for every room. The lake sparkled like scattered diamonds, reflecting the sky so perfectly it was hard to tell where water ended and heaven began. The guest houses dotted the property like elegant punctuation marks, each one designed to offer privacy and comfort. And there, gleaming like a silver coin against the emerald grass, was the helipad that had seemed like such an extravagance when I'd had it installed. As Marcus brought us down in a perfect landing, I watched my family's faces. The awe was unmistakable, but underneath it was something more complex. Confusion, embarrassment, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of respect. Margot was waiting on the stone terrace as we disembarked, tablet in hand and wearing the kind of confident smile that comes from years of managing the impossible. She had been with me through the lean years when we shared peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and celebrated landing a small client like we'd won the lottery. Now she managed a portfolio that would have seemed impossible to imagine back then. "Welcome home, Mrs. Anderson," she said, her voice warm but professional. "The tour materials are prepared, and Chef Thomas has lunch ready whenever you'd like." Chef Thomas. Another revelation for my family to process. "Thank you, Margot," I said, then turned to my stunned relatives. "Welcome to my home." The front entrance of the mansion opened into a foyer that managed to be both grand and welcoming. The crystal chandelier that hung from the coffered ceiling had been salvaged from a historic hotel in Vienna. The marble floors were original to the house, restored to their 19th century beauty. Fresh flowers from the estate's greenhouse, white orchids and deep purple roses, filled the air with subtle fragrance. But it was the family portraits that lined the walls that seemed to catch their attention most. Not portraits of strangers, but photos of us. Pictures from Daniel and Mark's childhood, their graduations, their weddings. Thomas and me on our 25th anniversary. All of us together at various holidays and celebrations, but displayed with a care and prominence that spoke of love, not just sentiment. "This is yours?"
Madison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I replied, leading them through the archway into the main living room. I bought it 18 months ago when I decided to expand my operations into this region. The living room was my favorite space in the house. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the gardens and the lake beyond. The furniture was comfortable but elegant, arranged for conversation rather than show. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with everything from journal books to poetry collections to the mystery novels that I'd always loved. Claire found her voice, though it sounded strained. Your operations. You keep saying that. Operations of what exactly? I settled into my favorite chair, a butter-soft leather piece that Thomas's favorite color, and gestured for them to sit wherever they felt comfortable. Anderson Security Solutions, I said. I founded it 12 years ago, initially to develop cybersecurity protocols for small businesses. We started with 3 employees working out of a rented office above Murphy's Diner downtown. Daniel sat heavily on the sofa. I remember you mentioning some computer thing you were working on. Some computer thing, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Yes, that's how it was usually described. Marcus twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. But how did you get from computer thing to all this? I leaned back in my chair, remembering those early days with a mixture of pride and pain. Do you remember how sick your father was during those last 2 years? I asked Daniel and Mark. Both of my sons nodded, their expressions softening with memory and grief. The medical bills were overwhelming. Insurance covered the basics, but experimental treatments, specialists, the equipment we needed to keep him comfortable at home, that all came out of pocket. I mortgaged this house 3 times trying to keep up. Claire's perfectly composed mask slipped slightly. She hadn't known about Thomas's extended illness, not really. None of them understood the financial strain we'd been under. I started the company out of desperation, I admitted. I had a background in computer systems from my college days, and I'd noticed that small businesses were getting hacked constantly, but couldn't afford the kind of security that big corporations had. I thought maybe I could build something better, something more affordable. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where Thomas and I had planned to spend our retirement. The first year, I made $3,000 total. The second year, $15,000. I was working 18-hour days, learning everything as I went, making mistakes that cost me clients and sleep, and probably years off my life. Mark spoke quietly. We never knew you were struggling that much. That was intentional, I said, turning back to face them. You two were building your own careers, starting your own families. The last thing I wanted was for you to feel obligated to support your aging mother. Madison's voice was small. So when did it change? The breakthrough came in year 4, I said, returning to my chair. We developed a new kind of intrusion detection system, one that could learn and adapt instead of just following preset rules. It was revolutionary, honestly. We got our first patent, then 3 more. Major corporations started paying attention. I reached for a leather portfolio Margot had left on the side table and opened it to show them the patent certificates, the industry awards, the newspaper articles about Anderson's Security Solutions' rapid growth. 8 years ago, we were acquired by TechShield International for $52 million. I said simply. I stayed on as division head and retained significant equity in the parent company. My stock options alone are worth more than most people see in their lifetimes. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Claire was the first to speak, her voice barely audible. $52 million? The initial purchase price, yes, but the ongoing royalties and equity appreciation have been substantial. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from his father. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell us?" It was the question I'd been expecting, the one I'd been dreading. Because of mornings like this one. Because every time I tried to talk about my work, the subject was changed or dismissed. "Claire, you once called it that computer thing Mary does. Madison, you suggested I find something more stable, maybe part-time. And honestly, I got tired of being measured by standards that were never meant for me. Here's what I want to know. How many times have you dismissed someone's dreams because they didn't look like success to you?" Because I was about to show them exactly what success really looks like. I stood again and walked to a different window, one that looked out over the formal rose garden. Thomas had always loved roses, and I'd planted over 200 varieties in his memory. But there was another reason I kept quiet about the money. I wanted to build something meaningful with it, not just accumulate more for the sake of having it. Margot appeared in the doorway carrying another leather portfolio. She handed it to me with a small smile that told me she was enjoying this revelation as much as I was. 3 years ago, I established the Silvercrest Foundation, I said, opening the portfolio and spreading documents across the coffee table. The goal was to create a new model for senior care, one that prioritized dignity, family involvement, and genuine quality of life over profit margins. Madison leaned forward to look at the architectural plans spread before her. "These look like homes, not institutions." "Exactly," I said. "Silvercrest Haven isn't a nursing home or even an assisted living facility in the traditional sense. It's a community. Residents have private apartments that feel like actual homes. There are common areas for socializing, but privacy is respected. Medical care is available on site, but it's integrated naturally rather than being the focus of daily life." Claire picked up one of the documents, a satisfaction survey from residents and families. The scores were impossibly high. "How many residents?" she asked. 64 currently, with a waiting list of over 200. We're planning a second location next year. Mark was studying the financial reports. "Mom, this must have $12 million for the land and construction, another $8 million in endowments to ensure it remains sustainable, and ongoing operational support that runs about $2 million annually." The numbers seemed to hit them like physical objects. Daniel looked up from a photograph of the facility's main building. "You've spent $20 million building a place you might never even need?" "I've invested $20 million in creating something that reflects my values," I corrected. "And it's not just for me. It's for everyone who deserves better than warehousing and hospital food and calling it care." I closed the portfolio and looked around the room at these 4 people who thought they'd been planning my future out of kindness. "Which brings us back to this morning's meeting," I said quietly. "Your very generous offer to contribute 15% toward my care, assuming I could even manage that much." Claire's face flushed red. "Mary, we didn't know." "No," I said, holding up a hand. "You didn't know because you didn't ask. You made assumptions based on appearances, on the car I choose to drive and the clothes I choose to wear and the house I choose to live in." Madison's eyes were bright with what might have been tears. "We thought we were helping." "You thought you were managing a problem," I said, not unkindly, but not softly either. "There's a difference." I walked back to the window, needing the distance to say what came next. The truth is, I've been watching this dynamic play out for years. The way conversations stop when I enter a room. The way you speak about me in the third person while I'm sitting right there. The gentle suggestions about my situation and your offers to help with groceries and your concerns about my declining health. My voice was steady, but I could feel the weight of years of accumulated hurt pressing against my chest. I've seen the looks that pass between you when I bring a store-bought dessert instead of something from the expensive bakery. I've heard the whispered conversations about my limited means. I've endured the gentle condescension wrapped in concern. Daniel stood up, his face stricken. "Mom, we never meant." "Intent matters," I said, turning back to face him. "But impact matters more. And the impact has been that I felt invisible in my own family, not seen for who I am, but categorized based on what you think I lack." The room fell silent, except for the soft tick of that grandfather clock and the distant sound of wind chimes on the terrace. Madison spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. "Mary, I think I owe you more than an apology." She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were cold, despite the warm autumn sunshine streaming through the windows. "The truth is, I've been jealous of you for years. Not of your circumstances, I thought I understood those, but of your contentment, your peace with yourself." She looked around the beautiful room, then back at me. "My life looks perfect from the outside. The house with the perfect landscaping, the charity events, the social media posts that make everything seem magical. But Mark and I have been in counseling for over a year because we can barely stand to be in the same room together most days." Mark's head snapped up, his face flushing. This was clearly not something he'd expected her to share. "I resented that you seemed settled, content with what I thought was so much less than what I had. It made me question everything about my own choices. So I guess I wanted to believe you were struggling so I could feel better about my own misery." The honesty in her voice was raw, painful to hear. Claire cleared her throat, her perfectly controlled composure finally cracking. "If we're being brutally honest," she began, then stopped, looking down at her manicured hands. "Please," I said gently, "honesty is all I've wanted." She looked up, and for the first time since I'd known her, Claire looked vulnerable. "Daniel works 70 hours a week. We see each other maybe an hour a day, and half of that is spent coordinating schedules. We have a beautiful house that feels like a museum, a social calendar that exhausts me, and enough money to buy almost anything except time together or genuine happiness." She stood and walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "I've built my entire identity around managing things, controlling outcomes, making sure everything looks perfect. When I looked at your life, I saw chaos that needed organizing, problems that needed solving. But really, I think I saw something I'd lost: simplicity, authenticity, the ability to just be." Daniel's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "Mom, I think we've all been looking at you through the lens of our own insecurities." He joined Claire at the window, both of them looking out at the gardens that somehow managed to be both carefully planned and naturally beautiful. "I've been so focused on proving I was successful, on making sure everyone knew I was doing well, that I forgot to notice whether you actually needed anything from me. I just assumed you did because that's what made sense in the story I was telling myself about our family." I felt something shift in my chest, like a door that had been locked for years, finally opening. "We've all been living behind narratives," I said, settling back into my chair. "You saw me as the sweet but struggling mother-in-law. I saw you as judgmental and self-absorbed. But the truth is messier than any of those stories.
Mark finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "What's the truth, Mom?" I looked around the room at these four people who were seeing me, really seeing me, for perhaps the first time in years. The truth is that I chose simplicity not because I had to, but because I learned the difference between having enough and having more than enough. The truth is that I kept driving that old car and living in that old house because they were sufficient, and I preferred to spend my money on things that mattered more to me. I gestured toward the portfolios on the table, like building something that could help people maintain their dignity when they're most vulnerable, like creating opportunities for others to succeed, like having the freedom to say yes to what matters and no to what doesn't. Claire turned from the window. But why hide it? Why not just tell us? Because I'd seen what happened to other wealthy people, I said honestly. Suddenly, every conversation becomes about money. Every request for help gets filtered through assumptions about what you can afford. Relationships change, people change. I picked up one of the photographs from the portfolio, a picture of the Silvercrest residents participating in a cooking class, their faces bright with engagement and joy. And because I wanted to build something meaningful before anyone could tell me it was impractical or unrealistic or too ambitious, I wanted to prove it would work before I had to defend it. Madison sat back down, her eyes red, but her expression clearer than I'd seen it in years. "So what happens now?" "I need to ask you something important. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew about someone just shattered? Because we were about to find out if this family could be rebuilt on truth instead of assumptions." "Now," I said, standing and smoothing my worn sweater, "I think it's time you see what I've actually been building with my life." The tour of the estate took over an hour. I led them through the main house first, showing them the 10 bedrooms, each one decorated thoughtfully but not ostentatiously, the library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable reading nooks, the chef's kitchen where I actually cooked most of my own meals, despite having staff available, the home office where I still worked several hours each day, managing my investments and the foundation. In my private office, the walls were lined with framed patents and photographs from the early years of Anderson Security Solutions. My first desk, a rickety thrift store find that I had painted 3 times, sat in one corner as a reminder of where I'd started. Claire paused at a photograph of me with my original team, all of us gathered around that painted desk in our tiny rented office. "You really built all this from nothing," she said, and it wasn't a question. "From less than nothing," I corrected. "I started with debt, no safety net, and the desperate hope that I could create something better than what existed." We moved through the guest houses next. Each one was self-contained, but connected to the main house by covered walkways that curved through the gardens. The architecture was consistent, but not repetitive. Each building had its own character while remaining part of the whole. 10 bedrooms in the main house, I explained as we walked, but these guest quarters are my favorite part. Each one is completely private, perfect for extended visits or hosting friends who want to feel at home rather than like hotel guests. Madison stopped in the doorway of the largest guest house, taking in the sitting room with its fireplace, the kitchenette stocked with good coffee and fresh fruit, the bedroom with windows that looked out over the lake. I can't remember the last time we stayed somewhere that felt like this, somewhere that felt like home. That was the point. Home should feel like home, not like a performance. We ended the morning tour at the lake, walking down the stone path that wound through flower meadows and herb gardens. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the sky so clearly it was like looking into another world. A wooden dock extended into the water with Adirondack chairs positioned to catch both morning and evening light. It was my favorite spot on the entire property, the place I came to think and remember and plan. Thomas would have loved this, Daniel said quietly, and I felt my throat tighten with emotion. I did love it. I brought him here in the planning stages, when it was just blueprints and dreams. He sat right here and told me it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen me create.
We stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching a family of ducks glide across the water. That afternoon, I took them to visit Silvercrest Haven. The facility was a 20-minute drive through country roads lined with maple trees showing their full autumn glory. As we pulled up to the main building, I watched my family's faces carefully. The building was impressive, but not intimidating. Red brick and white columns, surrounded by gardens that looked more like a park than institutional landscaping. Residents were visible on the wraparound porches, some reading, others engaged in quiet conversation. The American flag snapped gently in the autumn breeze. Inside, the atmosphere was immediately different from any care facility they'd ever seen. The air smelled faintly of lavender and fresh bread, not disinfectant. The lighting was warm and natural. The decor was residential rather than medical. Comfortable furniture arranged for conversation, artwork on the walls, fresh flowers on every table. "Mrs. Anderson!" A woman in her 70s approached us with a bright smile. She was wearing regular clothes, a cardigan and slacks, not a uniform. "How wonderful to see you!" "Helen, I'd like you to meet my family," I said. "Everyone, this is Helen Morrison. She was one of our first residents and now serves on our Family Advisory Council." Helen shook hands with each of them, her grip firm and her eyes bright with intelligence. "Your mother-in-law is a treasure," she told Claire and Madison. "She comes to our book club every month, and let me tell you, she gives us a run for our money with those mystery novels." As we walked through the common areas, the difference was unmistakable. Residents weren't sitting in wheelchairs lined up against walls. They were engaged, painting in the art studio, working in the greenhouse, playing cards at tables by the windows. The staff interacted with them as individuals, not patients. In the music room, a young volunteer was playing piano while a small group sang along to songs from the 1940s. Their voices weren't perfect, but their joy was unmistakable. "This is nothing like the places we researched," Claire said quietly. "That was the goal," I replied. "I wanted to create somewhere that honored the whole person, not just their medical needs." We visited the dining room during afternoon tea, a daily tradition where residents could gather for coffee, homemade pastries, and conversation. The tables were set with real china and cloth napkins. The food was prepared by an actual chef, not reheated from industrial kitchens. An elderly gentleman named Robert approached our group. He was well-dressed and articulate, clearly someone who had led an interesting life. "You must be Mary's family," he said with a warm smile. "She talks about you often. Are you here to see what all the fuss is about?" Madison laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her all day. "Something like that. Well, I can tell you, this place saved my life," Robert said matter-of-factly. "Not medically, though the care here is excellent, but emotionally. I was dying of loneliness in my old apartment. Here I have friends, purpose, dignity. Your mother-in-law understands that growing older doesn't mean becoming invisible. Back at the estate that evening, we gathered in the main dining room for dinner. Chef Thomas had prepared a meal that was elegant but not pretentious. Roasted chicken with herbs from the garden, vegetables that tasted like they'd been picked that morning, bread that was still warm from the oven. The conversation was different now. Softer. More honest. "I owe you an apology that's bigger than words," Claire said as we finished the main course. "I've spent so much time trying to control everything around me that I forgot to actually see the people I was trying to control." She set down her fork and looked directly at me. "You've accomplished something I never could have imagined, and you did it while dealing with grief and financial stress and all the challenges I never even knew about. And instead of celebrating that, I tried to manage you." Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I've been so focused on my own success that I lost sight of yours entirely. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you built, proud of how you handled Dad's illness, proud of the way you've chosen to use your resources." His voice cracked slightly. "I'm also ashamed that you felt like you couldn't share any of this with us." Mark nodded in agreement. "We created an environment where you had to hide the best parts of yourself to maintain peace. That's on us, not you." Madison had been quiet through most of dinner, but now she spoke up. "Mary, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy?" she asked simply. "With all of this, with the choices you've made, with the life you've built, are you genuinely happy?" I considered the question seriously. "Yes," I said finally. "Not every moment, not every day, but yes, I'm happy. I'm content. I'm proud of what I've accomplished and excited about what comes next." I looked around the table at these 4 people who had driven me to the edge of my patience that morning and somehow become my family again by evening. "But I'm happiest when I can share it with people I love," I added. "And I haven't been able to do that for a very long time." Tell me honestly, when someone shows you who they really are, do you have the courage to admit you were wrong about them? Because what happened next changed everything. Over dessert, a tart made with apples from the estate's own orchard, the conversation turned to the future. "I want to help," Clara said suddenly, "with Silvercrest, with the foundation. I've been running charity events for years, but this is the first time I've seen something that actually changes lives." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of enthusiasm I hadn't seen from her before. "What if we organized a fundraising gala? Not one of those stuffy affairs where people write checks to feel good about themselves, but something that actually introduces people to what you're doing." Madison nodded eagerly. "And I could help with the marketing, the communication strategy. Mark's agency has connections throughout the region. We could create real awareness, bring in serious funding." I felt something warm spread through my chest. "You'd want to do that?" "Mary," Madison said, her voice serious, "what you've built at Silvercrest is what I wish existed for my own grandmother when she was declining. It's what I hope exists for me when my time comes. Of course I want to help." Daniel cleared his throat. "Actually, I've been thinking about something all afternoon. My company has been looking into corporate social responsibility initiatives. What if we established a partnership with Silvercrest? Not just funding, but employee volunteer programs, maybe even professional development opportunities for your staff." The ideas kept coming. Claire suggested reaching out to her network of wealthy friends who were looking for meaningful ways to use their resources. Madison proposed a documentary series about innovative approaches to aging. Mark wanted to create a speakers bureau where Silvercrest residents could share their expertise with local schools and organizations. "Wait," I said, holding up my hands. "All of this sounds wonderful, but I need to know, are you offering to help because you feel guilty about this morning, or because you genuinely believe in what we're doing?" The table fell quiet. Claire was the first to answer. "Both," she said honestly. "I do feel terrible about how we treated you, but more than that, seeing Silvercrest today showed me what's possible when someone with vision and resources decides to actually solve a problem instead of just complaining about it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've been writing checks to charities for years, but I've never seen anything that made me think this is how it should be done. What you've created isn't just better, it's transformative." Madison nodded in agreement. "And honestly, I need this. I need to be part of something meaningful. My work feels empty most of the time, like I'm just moving money around to make rich people richer. This feels like a chance to actually matter." We spent the rest of the weekend talking, planning, and most importantly, just being together without the undercurrent of condescension and misunderstanding that had poisoned our interactions for years. Saturday evening, we built a fire in the main living room and sat around it like we had when the boys were young. The conversation ranged from family memories to business strategies to dreams for the future. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to adults who saw me as an equal rather than children who saw me as a burden. Sunday morning, I took them on the walking trails that wound through the 30 acres. The autumn colors were at their peak, reds and golds and oranges that looked like someone had set the forest on fire. We talked about Thomas, about the early years of my marriage, about the dreams I'd had as a young mother that seemed so impossible then. "Do you ever regret not telling us sooner?" Daniel asked, as we paused by a stone bench overlooking the valley. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I think this timing was right somehow. You needed to see me at my lowest before you could appreciate me at my highest, and I needed to know I could do it alone before I could trust you to help." Claire laughed softly. "You've been running circles around us for years, haven't you?" "Not running circles, just running my own race." When it was time for them to leave Sunday afternoon, the white helicopter was waiting on the pad like a faithful friend. This time, nobody questioned its presence or my right to use it. They climbed aboard with the easy familiarity of people who were beginning to understand that their assumptions about the world might need some serious revision. As Marcus fired up the engines, Claire leaned over to speak directly into my ear over the noise. "Thank you," she said, "for showing us who you really are and for giving us a chance to show you who we really want to be." Madison's hug lingered longer than usual. "You've given me hope," she said, "for a different kind of future, for myself and for all of us." My sons didn't need words. The looks in their eyes said everything. Pride, respect, love, and maybe just a touch of awe at the woman who had raised them and then continued growing long after they thought her story was finished. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying them back to their regular lives, I stood on the terrace and watched until it disappeared over the ridge. The estate felt peaceful around me, the way it always did, but now it felt complete in a way it hadn't before. In the weeks that followed, our family dynamic shifted in ways both subtle and profound. The group text thread that had once been full of polite check-ins became a stream of ideas, questions, and genuine conversation. Claire sent photos from Silvercrest visits. Madison shared marketing concepts. Daniel forwarded articles about innovative senior care models from around the world. More importantly, they started asking my opinion on things that had nothing to do with my care or my circumstances. Career decisions, family planning, investment strategies. For the first time in years, I felt like my experience and wisdom were valued rather than dismissed. The fundraising gala Claire organized that December raised over $2 million for Silvercrest's expansion. But more valuable than the money was the conversation it started in our community about aging, dignity, and what we owe each other as human beings. Madison's documentary series launched the following spring and won awards for its honest portrayal of innovative elder care. She told me later that working on it had saved her marriage by giving her and Mark a shared purpose that reminded them why they'd fallen in love in the first place. Daniel's partnership provided not just funding, but professional development opportunities that raised the standard of care throughout the industry. Watching him present our model to his board of directors, I felt the same pride I'd felt when he gave his high school valedictorian speech. But the real transformation wasn't in what we accomplished together. It was in how we learned to see each other. I realized that my secrecy, while protecting me from their judgment, had also protected them from the opportunity to know me fully. By hiding my success, I denied them the chance to celebrate with me. By anticipating their dismissal, I'd sometimes dismiss them first. They learned that assumptions are dangerous things, that appearances can be deliberately misleading, and that everyone, regardless of age or circumstances, deserves to be seen as a complete person rather than a problem to be solved. Most importantly, we all learned that family isn't about managing each other's lives or meeting each other's expectations. It's about choosing again and again to see each other clearly and love what we find there. 6 months after that family meeting that was supposed to plan my decline, I hosted the first annual Silvercrest Family Appreciation Day on the estate grounds. Over 300 people came: residents, families, staff, volunteers, and community supporters. I stood on the terrace watching children play on the lawn where my helicopter first landed, watching elderly residents share stories with teenagers, watching families reconnect over shared purpose. Claire was organizing games with the efficiency of a general and the joy of a child. Madison was documenting everything, her camera capturing moments of genuine connection. My sons were grilling burgers and debating business strategies with Silvercrest residents who had decades of experience in their fields. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in watercolors of pink and gold, I felt arms slip around me from both sides, Claire and Madison, flanking me like the daughters I'd never had, but somehow found. "Thank you," Claire said quietly, "for teaching us the difference between managing someone and loving them." "Thank you," Madison added, "for showing us that it's never too late to start over and get it right." I looked out over the gathering at all these people whose lives were interconnected in ways both visible and mysterious. Some had come thinking they were helping others and discovered they were healing themselves. Some had come seeking care and found purpose. Some had come with assumptions and left with wonder. The helicopters, both mine and 2 others that had brought guests from the city, sat quietly on the pad like sleeping giants. Tomorrow they would carry people back to their regular lives. But those lives would be different now, expanded by the possibility of what could happen when we stop underestimating each other and start building something beautiful together. As the last light faded and the first stars appeared, I thought about that family meeting 6 months ago. How they'd sat in my living room with their presentation and their plans and their gentle condescension, so certain they knew what I needed. They'd been right about one thing. I did need care, but not the kind they'd imagined. I needed the care that comes from being truly seen, the care that builds rather than manages, the care that says, I believe in who you are and who you're becoming, rather than I'm worried about who you used to be. The truth is, we all need that kind of care. We all deserve to be seen as more than our circumstances, more than our struggles, more than other people's assumptions about what we lack. I smiled, listening to the distant sound of laughter and conversation, the gentle splash of someone skipping stones across the lake, the rustle of wind through the trees Thomas had loved. True wealth, I understood now, wasn't measured in acres or accounts, or even foundations built from good intentions. True wealth was this, the sound of family choosing each other again and again, with eyes wide open and hearts brave enough to see clearly. And in that moment, surrounded by love that had been tested and found genuine, I knew I was the richest woman in the world.